This is Eric ICX setting a new world record in NES Tetris by being the first person to ever reach level 146 in the August 2022 Masters event. You may notice that this level is very dark. That's because he has gotten so much farther than the game's programmers originally intended that the code for the game colors is actually glitching out. But beyond that, Eric set perhaps an even more significant record in the overall scene. The longest competitive Tetris match ever, with this one game lasting 37 minutes and 20 seconds, over 4.5 times longer than a typical game used to last. This is the apex of a wave of players using a technique called rolling developed less than 2 years ago that completely turned the meta of NES Tetris upside down and has had games going longer and longer. This has a lot of people in the community debating, is it time to change the rules of the game? One, so that audiences won't get bored, and two, so that organizers won't run behind schedule. Because when you're trying to run a live tournament that operates on a set schedule and a venue with limited time, you can't have matches going on far longer than you can reasonably predict. And the two biggest tournaments in the scene today have both put out official stances on what they're going to do. This month, in September, the online-based Classic Tetris Monthly Tournament is introducing what is effectively a line cap on level 49, by having a ROM hack start dropping pieces 6 times a second, making it virtually impossible to play on. And the Classic Tetris World Championships next month in October, which are happening live for the first time since 2019, have announced that they are not going to have a line cap or score cap or any limiting cap at all. So was this the right decision? Will the World Championships be a bloated train wreck and have to be cut short after running overtime? Well, the hard part is that historically the only universally gathered statistic about NES Tetris matches is who won and who lost. So any discussion on how much games have increased in length and what the results of changing the rules would be has, up to this point, been reliant primarily on intuition and guesswork. But I didn't think that was good enough. I wanted some actual answers. So for the past 9 months, I've been gathering tons of data on over 1,000 games between the top players in the scene, and in this video I'm going to show exactly how much games have been increasing in length, along with projections of what will happen this month with Classic Tetris Monthly's line cap at 49, and what's going to happen next month at the Classic Tetris World Championships, both if they do nothing, and if they try out several different time-saving measures, including a line cap, to finally determine what's the most effective solution. To begin with though, we need a little bit of context on how the scene got in this situation in the first place. So let's get started. NES Tetris was originally released in 1989 as a single-player game, but thanks to a bunch of fortunate coincidences, it ended up working really well in a competitive format where people play independent games head-to-head and try to beat each other's score. Chris Tang, commentator for the Classic Tetris World Championships since the beginning, described one of the most important coincidences in his talk at GDC in 2019.
So when a player reaches level 29, NES Tetris pieces fall at a rate of 1 line per frame, making horizontal movement nearly impossible, resulting in imminent death. This effectively acts as a kill screen and will instantly end the game for nearly any player. The kill screen behavior is unique to NES Tetris, and it cannot be played forever like classic Tetris variants such as Game Boy version or Tengen Tetris. The results of these mechanics create an imminent death situation, and round times are around 6 to 9 minutes at most in duration, which are a very good length for an esports match.
In 2019, this was correct. The two major playstyles were DAS, which uses the built-in piece movement of the game by holding the side-to-side buttons down, and hyper tapping, which uses manual tapping of the buttons to achieve faster speeds. In the World Championships, the game is started on level 18, with pieces taking 1 second to fall. After 130 lines, the game transitions to level 19, where pieces take 2/3 of a second to fall, and the game moves up a level every 10 lines until the maximum speed is reached, with pieces falling every 1/3 of a second when the player hits the level 29 kill screen at 230 lines. DAS can't move pieces to the side at this speed, which effectively ends the game, and even though hyper tappers could sometimes squeak out a handful of lines in a Tetris or two, it was not really enough to impact the length of games. This was the longest game in the entire 2019 championships, where hyper tapper Joseph Saley lasted just 7 lines past level 29. And the overall world record wasn't much better. At the end of 2019, the highest score world record of 1.35 million was also by Joseph Saley in a game in which he only got a few lines beyond that to level 30. Over the next 2 years, hyper tappers slowly made progress in getting better at playing past level 29, but it was still very rare to see a game ever get beyond level 31 or 32 in competition. And then in late 2020, one person changed everything. A player named Cheese combined several techniques for button mashing that he had observed in other games to develop a more efficient technique for NES Tetris, where he rolled several fingers across the back of the controller to push the buttons into a finger on the top. This technique was called rolling, and it actually made the level 29 speed much more possible to play on. So a ton of world records got shattered over the following year. The longest game of the 2021 World Championships, which happened online, was by Roller Hufflepuffus, in which he got all the way to level 41. And the world record high score by Cheese at the end of 2021 was a staggering 2.34 million, in which he got all the way to level 61. Because remember, after level 29, the speed doesn't increase. So if you can play past level 29, you can theoretically play forever. This was around the time in the community where people really started talking about the potential for future matches to get too long and too boring. So in December 2021, I decided to start keeping track of a ton of data points on every game being played in the Classic Tetris Monthly Masters event, which features the 16 best qualifying players in the world playing best of 5 matches in a single elimination bracket. This event was basically the perfect tournament to track for good reliable data, because 1, it happened consistently once a month, 2, the prize pool had grown to several $1,000s, which heavily incentivized all the best players in the world to play every time, and 3, it was online, so all the best players in the world could actually play every time. And so now, 9 months later, I finally have all this data that shows the trajectory of how games got longer in the past and how much longer they might get in the future. Let's dive in. First, one of the things I tracked was what playstyle players used past level 29 on each individual game. As you can see, the dash playstyle was already nearly extinct in this tournament, but the hypertapping playstyle was still pretty prominent at the beginning, with 65% of games still using it in January. But at this point, it has been almost entirely replaced, with 94% of the games using rolling by August. Playing past level 29 used to be a negligible part of tournaments, making up only 3.5% of the total runtime in December, but now with the rise of rolling, it's ballooned up to 19% in August. The average game length has been a bit bumpy, but also undeniably shows a clear trend upwards, having also increased from 7.5 minutes in December to 9.7 minutes in August. And finally, here's how many games got to every level past level 29. As we can see, there used to be a lot of games that ended very quickly past level 29, but now it's more spread out further to the right. So where's Eric's game on the chart? Oh wait, this chart only goes up to level 49. Some games are missing. Let's double the length of the chart. Okay, now it goes up to level 69. Eric's game still isn't on here. The chart now includes every game except for Eric's. Let's see where Eric's game is. Let's keep going out, going out, going out. Ah, there it is, level 146. Now this chart should tell you something. Eric's game was a massive outlier, and the thing is, it didn't even need to happen. His opponent Hufflepuffus only made it to level 66, and Eric had already beaten his score by level 70. Eric continued to play another 76 levels after he had already won. This is what's known as a mulling. It used to be taboo to do this in the early days of the scene because live events couldn't afford to waste time. But the term got coined after a commentator encouraged Ben Mullen to keep playing during this match in 2017 because he was close to getting the first ever 1 million point score in a live competition. The practice of mullining has become a lot more common in recent years because most matches happen online where there's less of a strict time constraint. Eric had kept playing for similar reasons to Ben Mullen. He was already most of the way there to the world record in his own personal best, so he decided to just keep going and going. And this is a crucial factor when it comes to predicting the future, because we can turn that level chart into a percentage chart, which shows us exactly what percentage of games reach a certain point. For example, 33% of all games in August made it to level 35. If we apply a linear projection to these numbers, we can expect it to rise to 39% in October. And if we take all these percentages and use them to simulate 1,000 best of 5 matches, we get this, a projection of what the length of matches is likely to be for the top 16 in the World Championships next month. The 1,000 simulated matches are sorted from longest to shortest, so over here we can see a drop-off with a small amount of matches that barely last 20 minutes. And on the other end, an exponential rise with a small amount of matches that last over an hour, with the very longest matches possible in the simulation lasting just over an hour and a half. Overall, the average match length is 37.2 minutes. If we compare this to an identical simulation based off the results of the top 16 in the 2019 World Championships, the difference is huge. Matches never got any longer than 40 minutes, and the average match length is only 22.4 minutes. So that's a big deal. Matches are lasting nearly twice as long on average. Except here's the thing, the World Championships have actually put a big limit on how long games can go. It's called eliminating the mullins. They've announced a return to their policy in the past where mullins were strictly prohibited, and this actually changes a lot. I also tracked where every game gets to if you take out the mullins, which in turn allows for a projection to be built without the mullins. And this gives the result of, you guessed it, what the World Championships would look like without mullins. An average game length of 33.2 minutes, a full 4 minutes shorter, with many of those outlier match lengths completely eliminated. This actually has more of an effect than adding a line cap at level 49, which would only drop the average game length to 35.7 minutes. But what if the World Championships eliminated the mullins and added a level 49 cap like the Masters event? Well, we can simulate that too. The average game length would be 32.7 minutes, only half a minute shorter than just eliminating the mullins. What if they eliminated the mullins and moved the cap down to level 39? It'd bring the average down to 32.4 minutes, only 20 seconds shorter than a level 49 cap. As you can see, there are diminishing returns here. No matter how you slice it, matches are still going to be much longer than they were in 2019. This is because there is another factor that currently has a much bigger effect on the length of matches than playing past 29. And, well, it's the matter of getting to level 29 in the first place. In the 2019 World Championships, there were a lot of very early top-outs. Probably a lot more than most people remember because they're unremarkable games, so they fade away into memory. Since it takes more than 8 minutes to get to level 29, every early top-out that instead goes to level 29 is the equivalent of a game that went to level 29 instead going to level 60, and players have gotten a lot more consistent. In the Masters event, only 29% of games were making it to level 29 last December with no mullins, and by August, that number was up to 76%. Compare that to the 2019 World Championships where only 10% of games made it to level 29, and it's not hard to see why match times have increased. There are a lot more early top-outs now going to level 29 than there are level 29 games now going to level 60. But the absolute biggest factor in how long a best of 5 match goes is, perhaps unsurprisingly, whether it's a sweep, goes 4 games, or goes all 5. Over the past 9 months in the Masters event, 46% of matches went 3 games, 28% went 4 games, and 26% went 5 games. This is the data that I use to help run the simulations. But the important thing to keep in mind is that these simulations just produce an average. The World Championships could end up with a bunch of games on the upper or lower end of the simulation. For example, when I showed the data earlier about the average game length in each Masters event, it suggests that the overall tournament is getting longer and longer, with the most recent one being the longest. But when I actually tallied up how long each tournament was, it wasn't August, but February that was actually the longest, clocking in at approximately 8 hours and 42 minutes of game time. And that's because February had the fewest sweeps and most 5-game sets out of any other month. So how do you reduce this wide range of potential outcomes? Well, it's simple. Instead of a best of 5 set, you make it best of 3. If we retroactively make every Masters event match best of 3s, 58% of them would have lasted just 2 games, and 42% would last all 3. If we do a World Championships 2022 simulation with no mullins and best of 3, the average match length plummets to just 21.2 minutes, and there is much less variance. And this is exactly what the World Championships are doing in the early rounds. They've announced they're returning to best of 3 like they used to in the old days. In a nutshell, if time is the main concern, we can look at exactly what effect each time-saving measure would have in isolation and see that the World Championships have already implemented the 2 best time-saving strategies. Next year might be a different story, but for this year the World Championships is absolutely fine without a line cap. They just need to budget about 50% more time per game to accommodate the increased consistency of the players. And heck, you want to know what the most effective solution would be if consistency is the problem? Just eliminate the longest, slowest part of every game. Level 18. That's where the majority of time is spent in every tournament. There's a mode on the Tetris Gym ROM hack called Transition Trainer that allows you to skip the first 130 lines and just start on the level 19 transition. If we simulate this out for the 2022 World Championships with no mullins, the average match length, even in a best of 5 set, is only 15 minutes. A whole 6 minutes shorter than full-length best of 3 matches. Players Fractal161 161 and Dog actually did a quick test game on this mode during downtime at the Lone Star Qual this summer. Even though it turned out to be a super outlier game that took until level 49 to determine a winner, the total runtime was only 9 minutes and 20 seconds, right in line with the maximum game lengths of old. In the far future, if organizers want to have as many games and matches as possible, this might be what they choose to do because it just blows every other option completely out of the water in effectiveness. And finally, as for Classic Tetris Monthly, as you probably would have guessed at this point, the data suggests that a level 49 cap won't have much of an effect at all this month. In the projections, only 2% of games are expected to reach the cap without mullins, which translates to only a single game across the entire 50 to 60 game tournament. And in the first couple matches we saw with the cap implemented, sure enough, none of the matches reached the cap except for this one game by Gerald where his opponent Miles topped out at level 35 and Gerald mullined the rest of the way there. The cap does seem to be affecting some players psychologically, causing them to play more aggressively out of fear of a hard limit, but at this moment in time, it's pretty much just a placebo. If 98% of games aren't reaching the mark, the best strategy would be to simply play as if it isn't there. So what's the big picture conclusion here? Am I saying that line caps aren't needed? Well, not exactly. This is a question I have been struggling to answer for the better part of a year. What you just listened to is actually the 5th version of the script I wrote for this video. I wrote different versions in January, February, July, and August as I had more and more data to look at. And the reason I rewrote the script so many times is because so much of the initial debate over line caps was over whether games would be going on too long, so that was the question I was trying to answer. And going back to the 2 original reasons people had for concern, the answer is yeah, games are getting a lot longer, which is a problem for organizers, but line caps are the least efficient solution, and there are many other superior methods to cut down on time. And if we look at the audience perspective, what I've realized is that focusing primarily on the time question is actually a big distraction from the real issue. Games don't become boring just because they're going on for a long time. A long game could theoretically still be exciting, and tournaments could rework their structures to accommodate this if it were the case. The actual best reason to implement line caps has to do with how it is affecting game strategy. And that's the subject I'll be diving into in the next video, where I interview Fractal161 right after he set a new world record. And if the video is up by the time you're watching this, you can click right on screen to check it out.